Welcome to the second episode of my tournament hero guide. Today's hero is Sang. I know some people swear by him, but I don't. I don't hate playing him per se, but I don't particularly enjoy playing him either. It has nothing to do with him being weak or strong, but rather his playstyle often feels fairly stale to me. I do recommend him for new players though, because his ability makes it quite easy to draft with him, just like Daru. So what does his ability do? Well, it's about as simple and basic as you can get from a hero. You gain one magic per turn, and that's it. I think this simplicity is borderline boring for a tournament hero, but that's just me. Anyway, this ability means he has built-in econ and control already. This makes him much easier to draft than other heroes since two criteria are already provided by the hero himself. Usually it's not enough just by itself, but it's much better than nothing. And he might be even easier to draft than Daru since Daru only has inherent econ but not inherent control. Magic is the most flexible resource in the game, so this naturally means Sang is also a very flexible hero. His ability is non-scaling though, so if you want to scale and win the game, the scaling will have to come from your card effects. But first, let's talk about Lucky. I think it's almost always an auto pick if you're playing with an ally build. Otherwise, it's not always a great choice because it needs protection to do anything. Let's move on to other cards. The first is Engraved Urn. This one is usually auto pick in tournaments in general, but it needs a reliable magic source to be truly viable. It's not a problem here on Sang because he provides you magic every turn, so you should always pick it, even when you're not running an ally build, because your opponents will often provide the allies for you. And in case they don't, you just don't buy it and you still do fine. The next card is Tome of Memory. This one is similar to Urn in the sense that it needs magic to work, but when you pick it, it opens up the possibility for you to do so many shenanigans, especially the lone combo being the best one. You should always pick it if you're running an ally build because it's the best counter to seduce, which is almost everywhere in tournaments. Otherwise, you should pick it depending on the state of the draft. If you're still early into the draft, pick it because of all the possibilities that it gives you. But if you're very late and you don't really have any combo that you can do with it, then you should maybe pick something else. The next cards are Sacred Tortoise, War Fetish, and Hurling Stones. From this point, I will simply refer to them as idols for convenience. These cards have the obvious synergy with Sang thanks to the reliable magic gain. War Fetish and Hurling Stones are win conditions by themselves, whereas Tortoise is usually just an econ support. The next card is Holy Wrath. It's a good card for Sang in the sense that it works probably the best on him compared to other heroes, but it doesn't mean that it's always amazing on him though. Be careful when you see this card in your draft. I know it's very tempting, but don't just randomly throw it in when you're drafting because very often it simply won't work without enough support. Next, let's talk about some decks that you could build on Sang. The first is a generic deck. Now, I know it's strange that I spent some time talking about all the good synergy cards only to bring up generic decks as the first one here, but that's because I think it's the build you should always initially aim for when drafting Sang. The synergy cards are amazing, but only if you get a good deck with them, which is not always the case. It's simply much safer to draft with a generic deck in mind, and then if you see the potential for the synergy cards to work, you can simply switch back to drafting the rest of your deck to support them. The best thing about these strategies is you don't need a perfectly optimal deck for them to work. Here's an example of a generic deck that I had an alien with on Sang. The next kind of deck is a Lone and Tom combo with some kind of Ghost Sync. Since Tom is already a high priority pick on Sang, getting this combo in your draft isn't particularly difficult. And if you do have it, it's best to also have Synod for a bit of extra consistency. And with Lon and Tom, you shouldn't have any problem with econ when running Synod. The next one is the idol build. You could choose one of the idols as your main strategy, or you could choose multiples. Tortoise and Fetish are preferable for me because these cards themselves give you econ and control. When you're going with hurting stones, Tortoise is often a must have as well because after you have spawned many herds, a single mayhem from your opponent often means that you will never be able to draw a coin again. When playing with these idols, the rest of your deck should support them. Don't pick other cards that also need dedicated support because you will have trouble with card slots. If you're late into the draft and you don't already have decent support, don't pick them. The best support cards you can have when playing this build are Synod and Ceremonial Dance. The more idols you have, the better. These cards help you gain extra idols fairly quickly. The next are cards that give you a reliable source of magic on top of Sang's ability. These are Enchanted Treaty, Behold the Veil, and Scroll of Petals. More Unguent is acceptable, but not great, because it can clog your draws, and the ball restock can potentially mess up your bank as well. And it feeds you magic rather than giving you magic. And when running with idols, you prefer to hoard up on your magic until you reach a critical point. Rites of Passage is another possible support, but only pick it if you have tortoise. Otherwise, its cost will place too much strain on your economy. And it also has the problem as Ball Goen in that you can't stock up on the magic. And speaking of tortoise, if you're running it, which ideally you should, big ghost things like Apothecary, Charlatan, and Condottiera are the best for this purpose because they only take one card slot and you don't have to draft any support for them. Tortoise is the only support you need for these cards. There's actually a neat pseudo infinite combo that you could do with a bunch of tortoises, rites of passage, and these cards, especially Kondo, since you're guaranteed to get at least two procs from passage with each war card you play. If you have enough tortoises, this could even be a true infinite play rather than just pseudo infinite. But pseudo infinite play is usually enough to win you the game right then and there. When it comes to playing this deck, I've seen people go for the magic feed as soon as they have one or two idols, especially in the case of tortoise and stones. This is not a good play. You want to maximize the usage of your magic, and that directly depends on the number of idols you have. Patience is the name of the game here. The longer the game goes, the more idols you have, the more likely you're going to win. There is no need to rush and don't spend your magic unless you absolutely have to. For example, when your opponent has resource denial or a big threat that you absolutely have to kill. In the case of herding stones, sometimes they give you goats or cows, which may give you magic, which lets you feed yourself even more. So it makes sense to go for the feed relatively early, but even then, you're equally as likely to gain rats or pigs. So I would say the best time to start going for the feed is when you have three or more stones and enough magic to spawn at least two hearts from each stone. If your opponent has a mayhem sitting in their bank, it's often a good idea to spawn some herds so that they are forced to use it. Then, after it's gone, you can fully commit to your herd spawning routine. This build is hard countered by Starfall Requiem, but thankfully you won't see that card very often except on Vieta. If you're running Fetish, I have a pro tip for you. Have a calculator handy for when you need to do damage calculations. Here's a screenshot of an idle build that I had an enemy with on Sang. The next kind of build is the Holy Wrath build. Similar to the idols, you need to build the whole deck around this card. The best support you could have for this is Odashir's Echo. This is because the longer the game runs, the more magic you have, which makes playing Wrath better. So the slow nature of this card doesn't really matter much. You also don't have to worry about econ support in order to buy Holy Wrath, but it's better to have some because the more Holy Wrath you have, the better. Shrine of Rebirth and some other Vest Cycle cards are also good in this build. A single Wrath saved by Shrines is often enough to be game ending, and Vest cards increase your chance of redrawing Wrath. Ceremonial Dance is also a good choice if you have the econ to support it. You should avoid cards that reduce your chance of redrawing Wrath. This means Daramek allies should be avoided, and the number of Endazu non-persistent cards should be minimized, especially if you already have Eco. Be aware when you're playing this deck against Vex. Spamming Wrath early is often not a good play against him. This deck is very vulnerable to resource denial since it greatly reduces the effectiveness of Wrath when you play it. Here's a Wrath build that I had an 8 with on Sang. Next, I will show you a draft I had on Sang recently with commentary. In this first pack, we have two acceptable choices in Tribute and Courtly Intrigue, but Tribute is just too early at this point, so I take Courtly Intrigue. Next, we have four other Vest cards, which all synergize with Courtly Intrigue in a sense, but Spy Network needs allies to really work well, which I don't have at the moment. Militia is not a great ally because it's not a war. It has only 1 HP and it only attacks once per turn, but it actually has one neat use case against Alin. When you want to kill her allies without triggering her ability, you can play Militia and you can feed magic on Militia to kill her allies. Embargo is not bad, but not great either because it doesn't give me econ or control. It just slows down my opponent a little bit. And if I'm going with embargo, I will need some econ support for myself as well. Also, if I'm going to play with Courtly Intrigue and embargo, I'm very likely to play with one of two builds. The first is Vest Cycle cards and Shrine of Rebirth, in which case Synod is a better pick than Embargo because it will let me restock more Shrine of Rebirths. The other build is Rite of Brute with Vest Cycle cards. I don't like Rite of Combat on any hero other than Daru and Doga because very often if you're not playing Daru, you only get one chance to play Rite. And if you're playing Rite of Brute, at least you will gain some resources out of it, which means it's already paid for itself, unlike Rite of Combat, which attacks for a little bit but doesn't end the game, so it's not that useful. And if I'm playing with Rite of Brute, I will have enough econ support for Synod, so that's what I take. Okay, next we have an interesting choice in Ceremonial Dance. If you remember, when I talked about the idols, I said that Synod and Dance are the best support for those builds. And here I already have Synod and Dance. So at this point, from this point on in the draft, I'm going to build the rest of the deck, assuming I will have some idols. Okay, next we have two cards that would work in an idol build. The first is Scroll of Petals, which gives me magic, which I also kind of need at this point because I don't have any other cards to give me magic. But I also have Dance, and when I'm playing Dance, I want to redraw it as often as possible. And if I'm going to take Scroll of Petals, it will reduce my chance of redrawing my Dance, but it's still needed. So I'm not sure if I made the right choice by picking Charlatan here, because by picking Charlatan, I'm even more committed to getting tortoise, not just any idols, but tortoise specifically. It's a risky move, but I just took the risk and went with Charlatan. Here we have a terrible pack. None of these are particularly useful, but at least Arson is not 100% useless compared to the other cards. Okay, thankfully I have Tortoise, otherwise, well, I wouldn't be showing this video to you. It's an easy choice. We also have another idol in Fetish, and it's also an easy choice. Okay, here we have more Ungoent to consider, because it feeds you magic once. But as I said in Scroll of Petals, with Scroll of Petals, I didn't pick it because I want to redraw Dance more often, and Bor Ungoen has the same problem. So I go with Infiltrate, which I don't think is a good choice by any means, but at least it will not clog my draws, and in the worst case scenario, I would just ignore it in my bank. I just don't bother buying it. Okay, here we have Engraved Urn, which is an easy pick. Here finally we have another urn, but it might be overkill at this point, and I really need another source of magic since I only have urn as a source of magic, but it needs allies to work. So if I'm playing against something like Daru Rise, I'm not gonna get a lot of allies to kill. So Beholder Vow is a must pick here. As you can see, this deck is not perfectly optimal, namely Courtly and Infiltrate don't really belong here, but I still got an Anya with it, simply because when this strategy works, it works amazingly well. My final verdict on Sang is I don't consider him to be a top tier hero. Some people will hate me for saying this, but he's more than good enough to win games with. Highly recommended for new players. Thank you for listening. The next video will be on Zalia, which I already have footage for, so hopefully it will be live soon. Goodbye and have fun eating magic.